There are not very many things that a Jedi has to fear. When the Force is your ally, they are the champions of light, wielding their power in the name of justice. But in the times when they are afraid, truly afraid, their power leaves them, and they are just as vulnerable as any other person would be. At all times, they must ensure that they remain courageous and turn away from fear. But there are things that even Jedi Masters are afraid of. Imagine, if you will, a being like Darth Nihilus, a monster of pure instinct that hunted individual Jedi for sport, a being which literally preyed on the living Force and treated Jedi like lambs to the slaughter. Well, we believe that there could be something potentially worse than Darth Nihilus. There was a creature called the Nameless, which is a bit of a misnomer, especially considering the fact that it went by many names, including the Shri Karai, literally translating to the Eaters of the Force. Well, my friends, welcome back to the archives, and in today's video holocron, we will open up the dark mirrors of the galaxy and explore the terror of the Nameless, the monster under the bed of the Jedi Order. Now, let us begin. The Nameless hails from the planet known simply as X, located in deep wild space. The first appearance of the Nameless was during the time of the High Republic era, as they hatched from beautiful jewel-like eggs, traded around as precious trinkets. But of course, no one suspects the truth of what lay inside these mysterious eggs. Upon hatching, the Shri Karai are sludge-like larvae that must feed immediately in order to grow and take form. But as they become more of their true selves, the Nameless will gain its distinguishing features. They were very large humanoids, possessing 4 legs tipped with 3 long claws which twitched uncontrollably as they moved. They had a long, stringy tail, and a broad head that features tentacles on the back, dangling around their mouth. Their skin was often deathly pale, and they possess glowing blue or red eyes. However, very few Force sensitives actually saw the Nameless in its true form. The Nameless had powers in the Force that it used to terrorize the Jedi, to seize their prey. Trying to sense the Nameless through the Force was extremely difficult. Someone could be lost to madness or see hallucinations, leaving them unable to truly see what the creature was. The hallucinations were different for every Jedi, resulting in perceptions of the creature varying from a towering monstrous being or simply a darkness with hundreds of teeth and eyes. The terror would overwhelm the senses of the Jedi, cutting them off from the Force, making them powerless to fight against their predator. When the Nameless would catch their prey, it would use its tentacles to drain the living Force from their bodies, leaving them as nothing but a gray, calcified husk, frozen in an eternal final scream. But what makes this creature so deadly is that it doesn't even have to personally encounter its victim in order to drain them. If the victim is within a certain distance of the Nameless and it knows them, it can begin to slowly drain them of the Force. This rapidly ages the victim and causes their vitals to gradually weaken, eventually shutting down until they become nothing but a husk. Even at a greater distance, the creatures obscure the Force from their victims, inducing a sense of dread and on the edge of one's consciousness, a magnifying existence of panic and exhaustion. The Nameless would feed off of the madness that they created within a Jedi's mind. It made them delicious. The worst part is that the process was slow. Some Jedi are thrown into an uncontrollable seizure every now and then, with the fear and confusion of the presence of the Nameless putting the Force user into a state of terror, in which they will feel cut off from the Force and reality. And the worst part is, the effects last for a long time. These creatures, just like Darth Nihilus, were driven by a desperate desire to feed a hunger, one that they could not satiate. Imagine, if you will, a species created by the dark side of the Force, the galaxy itself, to be an army of rabid Nihiluses. Unlike the Sith Lord of Legend, however, they understood absolutely nothing beyond this hunger, and were incapable of comprehending certain dangers of their well-being. The Nameless have been known to push through fatal wounds and hunt despite radiation poisoning. They could not be stopped until they were killed in totality, as they could not be controlled except through a few artifacts. The Jedi would soon discover this, combining the artifacts known as the Rod of Seasons with the Rod of Daybreak in order to form what they called the Rod of Power. It only took a single one of the Shri Karai, known as the Leveler, to scare the entirety of the Jedi Order of the High Republic though, despite this new weapon. The Leveler was let loose on Starlight Beacon, which was a space station isolated in the middle of space, and many powerful Jedi Masters were trapped inside there. One legendary Jedi of this era, by the name of Loden Greatstorm, would fall prey to the Leveler. The history of the Sri Karai and the Leveler itself is pretty intricate, so we'll offer a quick summary of their origins. Long ago, a family known as the Rose, deep in wild space, had a history of conflict with the Jedi, causing them to unleash the species, the Sri Karai. It was theorized, but never confirmed by the Jedi, that the creatures were made using the dark side, and that they originated from the artifacts and the rods that we mentioned just briefly earlier. However, the fate of the family was sealed during this conflict, and all of them were nearly wiped out. Many of the rods were lost to history, as it was believed that the Nameless ran rampant. What was later thought to be a final egg of the Sri Karai made it into the hands of a cult by the name of the Path of the Open Hand. This cult believed that when anyone who could actually use the Force, including the Jedi, this made them innately extremely dangerous. So they began revering the beasts and worshipping them as the great equalizer of the galaxy, calling them the Great Levelers, believing that the creatures would make the galaxy an equal place for all through their mass mutilation of Force sensitives. They believed the Nameless to be an agent of balance, and the one who held the rod would control them as the champion of balance. The Path of the Open Hand planned to obtain the rods of power in order to control the beasts and unleash them once again on the Jedi. While the cult was looking for the rods, however, the egg would hatch prematurely when one of the cultists unleashed it to attack a group of Jedi. During the rampage in the holy city of Jeddah, this beast would kill one Jedi after another, hunting them insatiably. During the event, the cult, the Open Hand, managed to collect both the Rod of the Seasons and the Rod of Daybreak. They then formed them together to create the Rod of Power, which unilaterally controlled all of the Nameless under their will. However, not the Alpha, the Leveler. The Path then went on and would find Planet X, which was ripe with dozens of nameless eggs. The Jedi chased the Path to this base and fought them in a final climactic battle, one which became known as the Night of Sorrow due to the sheer number of Jedi that would die by the dozens to the Nameless. Eventually though, the Nameless began to turn on the cultists that they served, since many of them were also Force sensitives. The current controller of the Rod of Power, someone by the name of Marda, decided to set off an explosion at the end of the battle, one which killed a bulk of the Sri Karai, all except for the Leveler, leaving the Alpha as the last of its kind. In that explosion though, the Rod of Power also broke into two pieces, back into the Rods of Daybreak and the Rod of Seasons. Marda maintained control of the Rod of Seasons and kept the Leveler as her own, escaping deep within the night as the Path of the Open Hand disintegrated. Marda promised though, as the last remaining member of the cult, along with the Leveler, that the Jedi would pay, even if it meant her descendants would need to enact it. Meanwhile, Grandmaster Yoda wiped out all of the Nameless from all sources in the galaxy that he could find, including from the Jedi archives, not wanting them to ever be used against the Jedi Order as well, even if it meant that another Jedi would learn about them first. This is how dangerous Yoda deemed them. But many believe that Yoda made a mistake here. In doing so, this left the Jedi Order completely unaware of this threat's existence and a possible return. And eventually, the Nameless did return. In Yoda's lifetime, in fact. The Leveler came to be frozen in ice in the shrine underneath the surface of the planet of Whitesand, guarded by a droid attendant and visited by further generation of the Martynas family, the last members of the cult. They also split the Rod of Seasons in two and hid it in separate locations so that no one could ever find it. And so, the monster would remain there for 150 years, until something strange started to happen. Jedi were beginning to have terrifying visions and nightmares of the creature's return, a vision of pure chaos and calamity. Finally, a member of the Roe family who had controlled the Leveler long ago manipulated the terrorists known as the Nile to orchestrate a conflict in order to distract the Jedi. The Roe then took the frozen Leveler and set it to defrost, unleashing it yet again, the creature's first victim, and the proof of its return was the legendary Jedi Master, Loden Greatstorm. Seeing his calcified husk of a body left the Jedi Order perplexed, and several friends of the Jedi, including his Padawan, was in a state of intense grief. Soon, Roe and the Nile ended up obtaining more eggs of the Nameless, 7 eggs in total. Planning a strike against the Republic and the Jedi, the group went about executing a complex plan to set loose the Nameless on Starlight Beacon. The Nile also sabotaged the beacon systems, cutting off security measures and shutting down most of its power, leaving all on board in complete darkness. Now this would be a great Star Wars horror film. The creatures rampaged across the space station, with the trapped Jedi being picked off one by one. Ro and the Nile succeeded in taking down Starlight Beacon, and all of the Jedi in the galaxy were recalled to the temple on Coruscant in great fear. There, Yoda was forced to face the consequences of his past actions and decision to delete them from the archives. It became clear to the Nile that they were using a power that they did not understand, and Ro had become drunk with using the Nameless, gone insane by the generations past. Finally though, the terrorist group were outmaneuvered and defeated by the Jedi Order. Ro himself would vanish deep into the galaxy yet again, keeping the rest of the Nameless caged away and hungry, waiting to be released. From that day forward, Yoda's consequences would continue. The Nameless became legend. They were the subject of nursery rhymes, expressions, and old ghost stories. For generations, Jedi younglings traded fantastical stories about the creature, even up until the time that Dooku was a Padawan. Dooku even mentions once to Ventress how he thought himself above the rumored stories that his peers would share about these old monsters. It had become a haunt to the Jedi Order, the one thing that could spook them when nothing else ever would. Their own monster under the bed. But the worst part about these prophecies within the holocrons, including the holocron containing the prophecy of the Chosen One, mentions the return of the Nameless at some point in the future. This is one of the few enemies that the Jedi were unable to defeat. The only thing that really scares them to their core, order-wide. There aren't many things the Jedi fear. With the Force as their ally, they are champions of the light, the wielders of justice. But when it comes to the Nameless, out there in the stars waiting, hungry, the Jedi will never forget them. And now, neither will you. As always, my friends, may the Force be with you, and have a phenomenal day.